Good morning, everybody. Welcome to History in the Modern World, where we're talking about the world and cultures. And last week we talked about forms of government, but several people were asking about things having to do with money last week. So I thought, let's talk about money this week. Money makes the world go round. It has a lot to do with how we live. It's a pretty interesting subject. A lot of people have a lot of questions about it. So I thought we would talk about money today. Welcome to everybody and the people coming in the Q&A box. Good morning, Evan. Good morning, April. Glad you guys are here. Looks like we have a good number of people to talk about history in the modern world today. Hi, Jacob. Hi, everybody else. So my background this morning, I was thinking to myself, Times Square in New York. It's a place where there's a lot of buying things and selling things. Lots of people go there. Lots of money changes hands. I thought that Times Square would be a good place to pretend we are this morning while we talk about this subject. So, as always, if you guys have any questions, put them in the Q&A box. I like in this class especially to do a lot of questions and answers and try to help you with your interests in this area. Hi, Ananya. Good morning, April. Evan, yes, this is in New York. Good morning, Gerard. We are going to talk about money this morning, Gerard. All right, let's open up our slideshow and let's get into it. So, history in the modern world this morning is how money works. Okay, so people want things. That's the simplest way we can open up this subject. We've got a person here, and this person wants a car. Cars are awesome. They let you drive around to different places. Usually when people turn 15 or 16, they start asking their parents, in the United States at least, to take them out to practice driving so they can get their own car eventually. They're pretty awesome. People want other things. Once you become an adult, you probably want a house. Lots of people like video game systems. There's lots of stuff we want, but those things are not free. They don't just exist out there. They're not just out there for the taking. Something like a car actually has a lot of things that go into it. Like a car needs tires, and it needs seats, and it needs engines. And each one of these individual things actually takes a lot of work and a lot of effort and intelligence to make them. If you think about this, try to imagine building a car yourself from scratch. And when I say from scratch, I really mean from scratch. Like, you can't go to a store and buy the tires. You have to make the tires yourself. You can't go to a car parts store and buy things for the engine. You have to build the engine yourself. It almost seems impossible because for every part of a car, there are so many parts that go into it. Like the engine has gears, and it has a fan on the front, and it has pistons, this thing on the right here. There's so many parts to an engine. And each one of those parts usually takes lots of people working with their time and their effort and their intelligence to make each part. I read an essay once that said, nobody in the world can make a pencil. And you go, what? Of course people can know how to make pencils. Yes, but nobody in the world knows how to do every single part and can do every single part themselves from scratch. If you think about it, even something as simple as a pencil, it has the wood, it has the lead or graphite in the middle, it's got the little metal thing around the end, it's got the rubber eraser, it's got the yellow paint. If you tried to imagine making a pencil from scratch, I don't even know where you'd start. You'd need to know how to melt down metal and make it into a little circle. You would need to know how to cut wood to the perfect shape and somehow get graphite inside. Now, there are factories out there where pencils are made, but nobody in that factory chops down all the trees themselves, melts the metal themselves, gets the rubber and dyes it pink themselves. It takes a lot of people with a lot of different things that they're good at to make something even as simple as a pencil. So when you think of things that are more complicated, like car engines or cars or airplanes, there's like a network of thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that all have to work and do their jobs to make the things that go into that final product. April says, oh boy, I cannot build a car. Yikes. I feel the same way, April. If somebody asked me to build a car from scratch, I'd be like, maybe I can carve you a wooden wheel. Maybe I can, maybe I can give you a log that I can carve it into something that looks like a car, but build a car from scratch? No, impossible for just one person. So yeah, all these people and all of their time and effort goes into making each individual little thing. But this person, if they're going to make something, what are they going to get in exchange? Exchange means you give something and you receive something back. Does anybody want to go to a factory and build pistons for a car? A piston, by the way, is part of the engine. It's the part that goes up and down inside the engine and actually makes the car move. It's really interesting if you look into it. Anyway, very few people would probably go to a factory and spend their time making pistons out of metal for free. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. So what do people want in exchange for their work? Well, they usually want money. There are a lot of people that, you have hobbies. There's people that do things for free that are just doing it because they enjoy doing it. People will donate their time. They'll volunteer for causes that they believe in. They'll donate their time to maybe working at a homeless shelter or maybe doing community service, maybe picking up trash in their community. There's lots of things that people do for free just because they want to. But in general, when we're talking about the hard work of like making things and doing things, people usually want money in exchange. Jacob says, my dad can build a car. That's awesome, Jacob. Aubrey says, that's impossible. Ryan asks, what is a wheel made of? Well, a wheel, just to go back to the car example, has, there's metal parts, there's rubber parts, there is a thing inside the tire that holds air in some types of tires. There's a lot of parts to even making a tire. While people know how to go to the store and buy things that can go into building a car, there isn't anybody in the world that could melt down all the metal, make the glass from sand, mix up paint from things they found in their backyard, and build a car from scratch. It would take one person knowing how to do thousands of individual things, finding raw materials and melting things and creating paint from scratch. It's impossible. Nobody knows how to do it. Everybody relies on other people that are good at things to make the things that they're making. And people usually want money in exchange for doing those things. So here's the person, he's working at the factory, he's making pistons, and in exchange, the factory, the company will pay him money. As one viewer said in the Q&A, you are right. This is called economics. Economics is the more fancy or complicated word for making stuff and buying stuff and selling stuff and exchanging stuff. When we pass things back and forth, we call that economics. And it's really just like the study or the science or the area of this exchange of things. So, so far we have people want to make things and people want to exchange it for something, usually money. But why money? Why these funny little pieces of paper? Where did that come from? Where was this idea invented? To talk about that, we have to go back in history a little bit. So why money? People usually have lots of questions about money. There's a lot of fancy terms with money. It can be very confusing when people talk about all the things that go with money, like taxes and the stock market. And there's lots of things attached to the idea of money that honestly, we don't have time to go into all of that today. But I thought we could talk about some of the basics. which is like, where does the idea come from? So again, our picture from earlier, people want all of these things in modern day. People want houses and cars and video games and all kinds of fun stuff. But back in history, if we go way, 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 way back to like before there were even countries, when there was just people living in places trying to survive, the things that they wanted were pretty different. You usually wanted, you know, a roof over your head, a way to keep out of the weather, to keep yourself warm and dry. But those things, huts or the basic houses that people built for themselves were usually much simpler. Instead of a car, you might have a form of transportation like a horse, if you were really lucky. You wouldn't be playing video games. You might need an actual weapon like a sword to defend yourself and your family. The needs that people had, the things that they wanted, were very different based on the time and place. Some scientists and historians will even talk about there's sort of a kind of, you can imagine like a pyramid shape of you have to get all the things on the bottom and they all have to be okay before you can really focus on the next level. Like you need to have enough food that you're not hungry all the time, and you need to have a place to stay that's out of the weather so that you have shelter. You kind of need your basic human needs met before you can focus on other things like maybe playing games for fun or having time to do make art. Historians will talk about that the very earliest civilizations, the earliest people that were on Earth, all of their food kind of came from, they would just wander around and they would like pick the berries and like the food that they could find on plants that was edible. They would kill animals when they could find one that they could catch to eat the meat. But so much of their day was taken up just trying to find food, trying to find places to sleep out of the rain, that you don't really have time to concentrate on things like having fun or playing games or making cool paintings when your basic needs are not being met or are very difficult to meet. Let's see. Mackenzie and Denali are here now. Awesome. April is asking about being able to see me or the screen. April, let me know if you can see me now. I go back and forth to a slideshow. So hopefully when I bring up the slideshow, you can also see me down in the corner. But yeah. Ryan says, that looks like hard work. Yes, it's very hard work. Getting all of the things that people needed to survive could take up most of their time, most of their day could be spent just trying to survive. In addition to trying to have these basic things like a house, a horse, a sword, you know, things to defend your family, people also, you know, wanted food. They would look for fruit. They would look for, you know, fish or other meat that they could find. If they were really lucky, they might be able to start turning food into food that could last longer, like making bread or making things that if you could make food that you could store, you would then have time to do other things. If you could make bread, or if you could preserve your meat, which means if you could like salt it or smoke it or do something that the food would last, you would then have time to work on maybe making your house stronger, or maybe you'd have time to experiment with like a better weapon that might be able to hunt you more food. Hadia is here from Pakistan. Hi, Hadia, welcome. Isaiah is here. Hi, Isaiah. Ryan's asking, did they use the horse for transportation? Yes, if they could find a horse and they could, you know, make the horse friendly and willing to let them ride it, then yes, they could use it for transportation. Isaiah, could you rephrase your question? I don't understand your question. Some of the words you typed out, I'm not sure what you're asking, but try again. I would love to help answer your question, Isaiah. Pierce is here. Hi, Pierce, welcome. So again, so this person here, they have all this attention on food and trying to find all their basic necessities, like someplace to live, hopefully maybe animals to help them, something to defend their home with, and needing lots and lots of food, especially if you had a family. So the person would have a lot of attention on this. They'd be wondering, where am I going to find my next meal? Where am I going to get the things I need to survive? Well, when people discovered that they could farm, things really started to change. So if a person here found themselves in a field of wheat, like wheat that was growing naturally, people discovered that you could take all the little grains of it, you could dry it, grind it, mix it with water, and you could like bake bread. They took like the seeds of these plants, they planted more, they would grow big fields of plants, and this was the start of farming. People could use plants, they could kind of control plants instead of just wandering around and looking for, maybe you find one wheat plant and you just chew the seeds off of it and you're like, well, I'm still hungry. People were thinking ahead. They were gathering the seeds and saying, maybe I can plant these, and if I take care of these plants, I'll have a ton of wheat in a few months. And then we can grind it, we can turn it all into bread, we can store the bread, and then we'll have time to do more stuff. Instead of wandering around, people would find good places to stay, usually near rivers or places where there was water, places that the plants grew really well. They would say, this big flat area next to this river grows plants really, really well. Instead of wandering around, let's stay here. Let's plant lots of plants. Let's take care of them. Let's defend these plants from the animals that would try to eat them. And this will be our home. We'll stay put. Ryan asks, was there little food in the past? Well, sometimes in some places. I would ask you to, wherever you live, Ryan, just kind of look outside. I live in Oregon near a forest, but I like to go on hikes. I like to walk out there. And I'll tell you, like during the summer, you wander around in the forest, there's very little food to eat out there. There's not just edible plants growing everywhere all the time. There might be a few things that you could eat, but there often isn't. In the fall, we have a lot of blackberries. We have a lot of apples and apple trees, but like right now in the middle of summer, there's not much to eat out there. If I lived way back in the past, I would have to wander pretty far to try to find enough food to keep myself and my family fed. I could try to hunt deer and other things that live in the forest, but it's difficult, especially in the old days when they didn't really have modern weapons. Trying to capture or kill a deer, and then if you don't have ways to preserve the meat, you have to eat a lot, and then the meat spoils, it goes bad. So yes, it could be tough to find food. But when they found places that they could plant food and start farming, it became a lot easier. Isaiah is asking if I said the name Valen. I don't think so. It must have been something else I said. And April says, go to a farm. Yes, well, people had to invent farms. They had to find things like plants that they could grow and then make lots of food. And Ryan asks, did they save food? Yes, they tried. People in the old days had to come up with ways that they could save their food. They would find that if they, for example, if they like killed a deer and they had the meat, they found that if they put that meat over a fire with like a lot of smoke, the smoke could kind of turn that meat more into something like what we think of as like beef jerky. And that smoked meat would last a lot longer than just raw, fresh meat. They found, again, like you could maybe like chew on like an oat plant or a wheat plant or something and maybe get some grain out of it. But they found if they cut all that down, dried it out, ground it up and made it into bread, they could make like flat bread that could last a long time. Or people that lived near the ocean or other places they could get a lot of salt, they found if they put a lot of salt on the meat, that could keep the meat good and edible for longer. So yes, people would try to come up with ways to make the food last longer and not go so bad. Sometimes people would dig down into the ground or find caves that were really cold inside. Here in Oregon, I visited a cave once that's like part of a park, and you go down in the ground and you go deep in this cave, and it's super cold down inside the cave, even in the middle of summer. And the park rangers there said that the native people that lived in the area would use that cave to preserve meat. They would kind of use this cave as like a natural fridge. When they killed animals like deer, they would take the meat down in there and they would hang it up, and the meat would stay good longer because it was kept basically refrigerated. So yes, early people were trying very hard to, when they were lucky enough to find food, they worked very hard to try to make that food last and not go bad. Jacob says, how did people think up the concept of farming? Well, it came from people observing that food that grew on plants like had seeds, and they probably observed that if the seeds were like, maybe they like ate an apple or another plant, type of food that had seeds, and they threw it in the dirt when they were done, and they saw more plants growing from that, and they realized, oh wow, if we take the seeds out of these fruits and vegetables or grains and we plant them, we can just grow lots more food here. And that was like the first farming, was people just intentionally trying to grow more of the food that they were eating. Ryan, yes, I've been to a farm. April asks, why do people call it a farm? That's just the word in English. There's different words in other languages for the same thing. April, if you'd like, you can look up the word farm in a dictionary, and usually at the bottom of the definition, they will tell you where the word comes from. So if you're interested, you could find out, April, and let the rest of us know. Okay, so here's our guy or girl who has all these wheat plants. And people would take the wheat plants and they would, again, like we were saying, take the grain and they could bake it and turn it into bread. Or they could take other plants and make them into things. People that lived near iron ore, which is like rocks that have little bits of the element iron. Over time, usually because now they had enough food that they could play around with this stuff and experiment with things, they realized that if they like crushed up these rocks and got them really hot and melted them, that the metal that came out of that, they could turn into metal objects. They could crush up rocks and get the metal out and melt it, and they could turn it into knives and swords and spearheads. And when people could move from like using like a pointy rock to try to kill an animal to now trying to use spears and other things to hunt with, that was a big benefit. It let people hunt more, or they could maybe make a plow or other gardening tools out of metal. They were able to get more gardening done. So having enough food that they could experiment and try out new things, which is basically early science, that let them make more food faster. And it's kind of a cycle that they start being able to do more and more. Milo's here and he's saying hi. He's saying hi to April too. Okay, so now people then figured out something pretty clever. One person might have a whole lot of bread, and somebody else might be experimenting with metal and making knives and things out of it. And instead of one person having to make all of this food and try to make their own weapons and maybe try to make their own, build things for houses, people figured out, what if we just trade? What if I focus on making bread and making food, and you focus on making knives, and then we can just trade our stuff. I'll have tons of bread, you'll have tons of metal knives, and when we're done, we just swap. And now I have bread and knives, and you have bread and knives. And early peoples were like, this is a great idea. Let's trade things, and then everybody can have lots of stuff instead of people only having like one thing. And the term for this was the barter system. Bartering basically means trading things. And usually people would have to kind of talk it out. Like another person might say, well, my metal spearheads or my metal knives, they take a lot of time and work. Like it takes me maybe a week to make one knife. And it only takes you like, you know, a day to make that bread. So I'll give you one knife, but you have to give me like 7 loaves of bread. And maybe somebody else would be like, oh, no, I'll make a knife and give it to you for 5 loaves of bread. So people would kind of figure out what kind of trade they wanted to make. And this was called bartering. Hadia asks, how did people have the idea of cooking? Well, to make a guess here, I haven't researched that exactly, but for a long time, you know, very early peoples had fire. Maybe they discovered it from lightning hitting, you know, dry grass, and it would start a fire, and people realized, whoa, this is really warm. People figured out other ways that you could like rub wood very quickly together with other wood, and that rubbing motion, it would heat it up enough that you could start a fire. Fires are warm. They keep you, you know, if you're in a cold, rainy area, the fire would keep you warm and dry. But early peoples also figured out that you could cook things with that fire. Raw meat sometimes can make a person sick, but when they would cook their meat over a fire, usually it would taste better and they would stay healthier. So people were like, oh, let's put all of our meat over fire before we eat it. It was probably just a trial and error kind of thing. Nobody knows who the first person was that cooked something, but when somebody did try that and they probably realized it went really well and they told the rest of their group or their tribe, and the idea spread really far. People also figured out often that if you took some sort of raw vegetable and you put it over heat, it often just tasted better. When you heat up different types of food, chemical reactions take place that we as humans just kind of like the taste of cooked food better than raw food in a lot of cases. Of course, there's a lot of foods that taste good raw too, but people tend to like cooked food. They tend to like how it tastes. Also, cooked food usually lasted longer than uncooked food. There are very, very, very small living organisms like germs and other things that just naturally live all around us. If like a hunter killed a deer, that deer just naturally would have germs on it. When they would cut up the meat, those germs would be in the raw meat. And if they ate that, they would be getting those germs inside of them. And sometimes, again, it would make them sick. But when they heated up the food and cooked it, it would kill most of those germs and they could eat it and they would not get sick. Well, if a tribe found, you know, if people found that eating lots of raw meat, they felt sick more often, but eating lots of cooked meat, they felt good, they would cook all their meat, and that was cooking. I hope that helps. Ryan asks, I think he's asking how did they melt metal, or what did they use to melt metal? That was probably just trial and error too. Nobody knows because it was so far back in history that we don't know the very first people who did that. But somebody must have figured out that when they heated up these rocks hot enough or crushed them up and then heated them up, they could melt this little bits of metal out of it. And probably just through a lot of curiosity, people being very interested in like, what is this? You know, let's heat it up again. Let's see what we can do with it. They would find that it was very strong. They could maybe take like a rock and like hammer it and flatten it out, and they could make something like a knife or a scraper that they could use to like scrape animal hides of animals that they'd hunted. It was just very useful stuff. But yes, they would have to get it very, very hot in a very hot fire before it would melt at all. April asks, do they ever trade houses? Maybe. Yeah, people might have built different huts or houses and decided to switch at some point, maybe in exchange for something. Ryan says trade is fun. Yeah, I agree. Aaron says that they can make spearheads. Definitely. Yeah. Ryan asks, who invented fire? Nobody knows. I mean, fire is a natural phenomenon. It just occurs in nature sometimes through like lightning strikes. Probably the first fire, early humans observed it in nature and were like, yes, that's good stuff. Let's make more of that. Let's figure out how to control it. Kanan says, hi. Hey there. All right, a few more slides here. So the barter system, trading things. People thought that this was great. And yeah, sometimes somebody would want more, you know, they're like, I need 8 loaves of bread for my 1 sword or knife. You have to give me more, and that'd be fine. But what if you trade 1 sword or knife for like 8 loaves of bread, and then you've got all this bread and you actually have more bread than you need? People might be like, okay, I'm gonna go trade this bread now for something else. But what am I gonna trade it for? Who am I gonna trade it to? Maybe this guy's got a whole lot of bread. This other guy has a horse, and he's like, hey, 8 loaves of bread for a horse? And the other person might be like, no, horses are way more valuable than that. I'm not gonna trade you a horse. So people sometimes had a really tough time in the barter system exchanging things. Imagine if you made something and it was pretty awesome, but everybody around you already had enough of that. You go, oh no, like what do I do? Like I made this cool knife, but everybody in my group already has a knife. Do I travel further to find more people that don't have knives? Well, people figured out that trading could be awkward. It could be like, I just got all this bread. Now, what do I do with all of this bread? This bread is not going to last forever. So somebody, again, a long, long time ago in ancient civilizations, these ideas have been around for a very long time. They would find bits of like precious metals, like silver or gold, and there was not a lot of it. And they decided, hey, we should use these precious metals, and precious here just meaning like there wasn't much of it. It was really hard to get it. So it was valuable. When there's not much of something, people usually want it. And gold is also pretty. You can make jewelry out of it. It's very, you can, it's very easy to like hammer it and turn it into different shapes. So people decided, what if we take these precious metals like gold and we use them as money? What if I take this gold that I found and I hammer it or press it into a shape like a coin? And the idea there was maybe 1 coin equals bread, maybe like 2 coins equals a sword, maybe something like a horse is worth like 5 gold coins. And people started and were basically inventing the idea of money. So people were basically saying gold coins are small, you can fit a lot of them in a bag or a pocket, and everybody wants them. So what if instead of me trading you bread for a knife or a whole lot of bread for a horse, what if we all just agree that everything is worth gold? Like gold can be traded for everything, and we all just trade gold for stuff instead of trading the stuff itself. So I make a lot of bread, and then if people want some of it, they trade me these bits of precious gold instead of their stuff. Now I have a bag of gold, and I can go trade my gold to people for knives or horses or wood for my house or whatever I want. So the first money was still basically just trading. People were trading bits of really pretty metal instead of awkward stuff. Like if I'm a woodcutter and I chop down trees, it might be difficult to carry my trees around to everybody. But if people come and just give me metal, gold or silver, they can take my stuff away, and I just have to now carry around a bag of metal discs instead of that guy gave me a crate of tomatoes, and that woman gave me a whole bunch of cloth, and now I have to store all this stuff in my house. It's a lot easier to trade bits of metal than big awkward objects. So this again is in ancient civilizations, like ancient Egypt and in the Middle East is where this idea was first being used. Even a long time ago in Africa and in China, all over the world, people really liked these really shiny metal that they found. They would dig it up. They could find it in streams sometimes. When they melted it down, they could make bigger, pieces of it. Everybody liked it. It was beautiful. It was kind of, everybody agreed that it was valuable, so it could be traded easily. It was the first money. Isaiah asks, how hot do you need to get metal for it to melt? It depends, Isaiah, on what type of metal. And this is something you can Google online, but different metals have different melting points. Some metals, like lead, melt a lot easier. If you have chunks of lead, you could put them like in just like your fireplace and the lead will melt. Other metals, you have to put them in very, 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 very hot, like furnaces to make them melt. They have a very high melting point. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but if you look it up, it's a very interesting subject. April says, this is when they made stores. Yes. If I was good at making something and I had a lot of it, I might open a store or I might have a stall in the marketplace where we might put a section in the middle of our town where in my spot, I have lots of cloth that my family's been making, and I'll let people trade me their gold or their silver discs for all the cloth that we made. And instead of going all over the city, maybe people were like, yeah, let's have like one area, like a marketplace where everybody will bring their stuff and then we can all trade our stuff. Yes, those were the first stores. Yeah, Ryan's saying, yeah, using metal as money. Jacob makes a really good point. Jacob points out coins aren't perishable. Yeah, perish means when something like goes bad or rots or breaks down. Even the best bread that you bake it to like last a really long time, it's going to go bad eventually. You can't keep it forever. Animals like chickens or whatever that you might trade, they'll die eventually. But a gold coin will last pretty much forever. Gold doesn't rust, whereas like iron and other metals will rust and kind of like not look as good, or they'll break down over time. Gold stays pretty much perfect. Like a gold coin would still be exactly the same 10 years later. People could get gold coins and then, they could pass them down to their children as, wealth going from generation to generation. If I made a lot of gold and silver, I could give it to my family and they could continue having that. Whereas if I had so many chickens, a bad storm might come and it kills all the chickens and we're like, well, we don't have any stuff anymore. Yeah, so as Aaron says, yeah, so that's how money started. But Hadia has a very good question about paper money. So yeah, so here we're exchanging money for things. Oh, that was my last slide there. Okay, so over time, people, gold is actually very heavy though. So like a bag of gold, you might not like to carry it around. So eventually, in various places around the world, people had the idea of, what if we printed up special like pieces of paper that only maybe the government is allowed to print, and that will stand for money. So they had the idea, paper is much lighter and easier to carry and move around than chunks of gold. A gold bar, incredibly heavy. If you, giant bug. Gold is very heavy for its size, while paper is very, very light for its size. So people just said, they kind of all agreed that this much paper, special paper that the government makes, could equal this much gold. Of course, there were, downsides to this. A piece of paper, even one that's printed up by the government, it could be a lot easier to fake it and make your own. If a person had access to like a printing press, the things that print up paper and books and money and everything else, they could maybe print their own money that looked a lot like the real money. And now they could make themselves rich. This is still a problem even today in the modern world, is that people will make their own, the word for it is counterfeit. People try to make their own counterfeit money, and they try to make it look like real money printed by the government. If you ever have a chance to look at like a modern, like $100 bill and compare that to much, older paper money, like the paper money from when I was a kid, it would still just be like a piece of paper printed with like green ink and whatnot. The paper is made with cotton, actually, so that if it goes through like a washing machine, it doesn't just break down. It's more like, paper money is actually a little bit more like cloth in a way. Anyway, that's a whole nother topic. But nowadays, they're putting lots of things in paper money, like little strips of metal, little pictures that if you look at it, it's like a hologram. They're trying to make things that are harder and harder for people to make their own at home. If you look at like a counterfeit $100 bill that doesn't have metal in it, and you look at a real one, you'll be like, oh, this is fake. Well, it's still just the government, and people are trying to make paper money that people can carry around easily, but that can't be, printed on your printer at home. And that paper money is still supposed to stand for stuff. Just like in the old days, we're still just trading. If I have paper money, I can hand you my paper $20 bill, and I'm at the store, and they'll trade me bread and milk and everything else that I want for my money. So the next time you see some money or use some money, you can think back to very early people and how it's all just based on trading stuff for other stuff that we want. So if you guys have any questions about money before we end off here, we'll end in just a minute or two. Pierce asks, but then did robbers come in? Yes, since the beginning of time, as long as people have had stuff, there's been people trying to take that stuff. Because most people are basically good, but there will always probably be people that think it's easier to take somebody else's stuff than to figure out how to get it for themselves. So that's where robbers come from. Oh, that's awesome, April. April will make stuff and sell it sometimes for her mom and dad. That's really awesome. That's very cool. Aaron asks, were the early spears made of rock? Yes. Lots of early civilizations, they would take rocks and chip them to make pointier, sharper rocks that could be used as like a spearhead. There's a type of like natural substance called obsidian, which is kind of like glass. But if you chip it, you can make incredibly sharp, like arrowheads. Here in Oregon, there's various areas that have lots of this obsidian rock that looks like black glass. And people would chip it and use it, and then they would tie it on the front of a spear and make a very sharp spear. April says, you can still print paper money to use for a game with someone. Yes. Yeah, like there's paper money that's printed out for like Monopoly and other games. Yeah, that's totally fine. But if you're going to go trade your money to somebody at like a store or at a marketplace, they're going to want it to be, the real money printed by the government, or they might not be happy that you tried to trade pretend money. All right, well, that's all we have time for. Thank you guys for watching this morning. In about 15 minutes, we'll be doing a geography class, and I'll be teaching that one today too. At 1:15 today, Dylan is teaching video game coding again. That class is limited to 30 people, and I think registration's already closed. But if you've signed up for that class, that is at 1:15 Pacific time today. But there's no limit to how many people can come to the geography class. And today we're going to be talking about the shape of the states. So go take a break, go get a snack, and be back here in 15 minutes, and we're going to talk about geography. It's going to be pretty awesome. So thanks for watching. Oh, awesome. Jacob says, thanks for teaching me about money. I learned a lot. That's awesome, Jacob. I'm glad. All right. I will see you all back here soon.